Chapter 9. First Steps as a Dog. The world looked different from this angle. The hospital room, once familiar in its sterile monotony, now seemed strange and distorted. The floor loomed closer, the furniture taller and more imposing. Emily stood, crouched, on all fours, her limbs trembling with the effort of holding herself in this unfamiliar posture. Her muscles ached, her joints protesting with every slight movement. Her eyes, once level with the world, now gazed up at it from a perspective that felt both wrong and terrifyingly permanent. She tried to lift her head, her neck straining against the new pivot point at the back of her skull, but the movement felt unnatural. The new weight of her elongated snout tugged her head downward, and her ears, those foreign, pointed ears that perched on top of her head, twitched involuntarily at the slightest sound. It was all too much. This isn't me. This can't be me. But it was. Her transformation was complete. Emily had known, intellectually, what was going to happen. She had been prepared for the changes, step by step, as her body was reshaped, modified, and altered into something that could no longer be called human. But knowing and feeling were two entirely different things. Now, as she stood on all fours, her legs bent in ways they had never been meant to bend, her body covered in fur, her snout filling her peripheral vision, she felt a deep, gnawing sense of alienation. This body wasn't hers. It couldn't be. Yet, it was the only one she had. Paul, the behaviorist, stood a few feet away, watching her with a patient, calm expression. He was tall from this angle. Everyone was tall from this angle now, and his eyes were soft but firm, the way a trainer might look at a new dog struggling to learn its first commands. He had been assigned to her after the final phase of the transformation, his job to help her adjust, to teach her how to move and function in her new body. "Take it slow, Emily," Paul said, his voice gentle, as though he were speaking to a frightened animal, and in some ways, perhaps, he was. Your body needs time to adjust, and so does your mind. Don't rush it. Emily's breath hitched in her throat as she tried to take a step forward. Her front hand, she corrected herself, though it didn't feel like a hand anymore, slid awkwardly across the smooth tile floor, her claws scraping against the surface. She wobbled, her body swaying unsteadily as she tried to shift her weight onto her back legs, but the movement felt clumsy, unnatural. Her balance was off. Her body was too long, too low to the ground. She felt like she was about to topple over at any moment. Her tail, the tail, twitched behind her, a spasm of muscle that she couldn't control. It threw off her balance even more, pulling her center of gravity in strange, unexpected directions. "I can't do this," she muttered, her voice low and rough, distorted by the changes to her vocal cords. It wasn't quite a growl, but it wasn't fully human either. It was something in between, a guttural sound that made her cringe every time she heard it. Paul knelt down beside her, moving slowly so as not to startle her. His hand reached out, not to touch her, but to offer a point of focus. "You can do this, Emily. It's going to take time, but you need to trust your body. It's different now. Yes, but it's still yours. You have control, even if it doesn't feel like it right now." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that she could somehow learn to live in this body, to move and function like a creature that was meant to be on all fours. But every instinct in her was screaming that this was wrong, that she wasn't supposed to be like this. Her legs trembled, her muscles quivering with the effort of holding this position. She could feel the strain in her back, her spine arching unnaturally as she tried to balance the weight of her elongated body. The bones in her legs, donor bones from the canine skeleton they had used to modify her, felt foreign, as though they didn't quite fit inside her skin. Every movement was awkward, her joints stiff and uncooperative. "Let's try something simpler," Paul suggested, his voice calm and steady. "Just focus on standing still for a moment. Don't worry about walking yet. Let your body find its balance." Emily nodded, or tried to. The movement of her head felt strange, the weight of her snout pulling her neck down, making it difficult to lift her gaze. She focused on her paws, her hands, which were planted on the floor in front of her. The pads on her palms were rough and calloused, and her fingers, now shorter, thicker, and tipped with claws, curled awkwardly against the tile. She shifted her weight slightly, trying to find a position where she didn't feel like she was about to collapse, but the effort was exhausting. Her tail twitched again, an involuntary spasm that sent a ripple of discomfort down her spine. She tried to ignore it, but the sensation was too strange, too disorienting. She had never had to think about balancing a tail before, had never even considered what it would be like to have one. Now, it was just another part of her body that she had to learn to control. After what felt like an eternity of standing still, her muscles trembling with the effort, Paul spoke again. Good. You're doing great, Emily. Now, when you're ready, try to take a step forward. Just one step." She hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. The last time she had tried to move, she had nearly fallen, but she couldn't stay frozen in place forever. She had to learn to move in this body, no matter how alien it felt. Slowly, carefully, she lifted her right front paw. The muscles in her shoulder protested, the movement awkward and jerky, but she managed to place it a few inches forward. Her claws scraped against the tile again, and she winced at the sound, but she forced herself to keep going. Her back legs were next. She shifted her weight onto her front paws, hands, and tried to lift her left hind leg. But the movement felt uncoordinated, her body swaying dangerously as she struggled to find her balance. Her tail twitched again, throwing her off even more, and she stumbled, her legs buckling beneath her. "Easy," Paul said gently, moving closer but not reaching out to catch her. He knew, as she did, that she needed to learn this on her own. "You're doing fine. Just take your time." Emily gritted her teeth. Though the sensation felt different now, her jaw reshaped to accommodate the longer snout. She planted her paws back on the floor and tried again, this time more slowly. She lifted her front paw first, right, then left, then her back legs, one at a time. The movement was clumsy, her body swaying unsteadily with each step, but she managed to move forward a few inches. Her muscles burned with the effort, her body protesting every movement. But she kept going, forcing herself to take one slow, deliberate step after another. It wasn't graceful, far from it, but it was progress. The days that followed were a blur of frustration, exhaustion, and small victories. Paul worked with her every day, guiding her through the process of learning to move in her new body. At first, even the simplest movements felt impossible. Her legs didn't bend the way they used to. Her balance was off. Her tail twitched uncontrollably, throwing her off kilter at the worst possible moments. But slowly, gradually, she began to improve. Her body, though alien and strange, was strong. The donor bones, reinforced with genetic treatments to ensure they would integrate with her own, functioned well within her frame, providing her with a sturdy foundation. Her muscles, though sore and stiff from disuse, began to adapt to her new form, growing stronger with each passing day. Paul was patient, never pushing her too hard, but always encouraging her to keep trying. He taught her how to move on all fours, how to shift her weight to maintain balance, how to use her tail to help stabilize herself. The process was slow, agonizingly slow, but little by little, she began to feel more comfortable in her new body. But comfort didn't mean acceptance. Her mind struggled to keep up with the changes. Every time she looked down at her paws, at the claws that tipped her fingers, she felt a wave of nausea. Her body was no longer her own. It was something else, something other. She could feel the weight of her snout pulling her face down, the soft bristles of fur brushing against her skin, the pointed ears that twitched involuntarily at every sound. The mirror became her enemy. She avoided it whenever possible, unable to bear the sight of her own reflection. The face that stared back at her wasn't hers. It was the face of a dog, a beautiful collie with soft golden fur and bright, alert eyes. But it wasn't her. She would catch glimpses of herself in the reflective surfaces of the hospital, windows, metal trays, the polished tile floor, and each time, it sent a shiver of horror down her spine. The disconnect between her mind and her body was too great, too overwhelming. She felt trapped, imprisoned in a form that didn't belong to her. One afternoon, after another grueling session with Paul, Emily collapsed onto the padded mat in the training room, her body trembling with exhaustion. Her muscles ached, her joints sore from the constant strain of learning to move in this unfamiliar body. She buried her face in her paws, her breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. "I can't do this," she muttered, her voice muffled by the fur on her snout. I can't live like this." Paul knelt beside her, his expression calm but sympathetic. "You are doing it, Emily. You've already come so far." She shook her head, the movement awkward with her new neck structure. No, I haven't. I'm just, I'm just pretending. I'm pretending to be something I'm not." "Your body has changed," Paul said gently. "But you're still you. You're still Emily. This body may be different, but it's still yours. You can learn to live in it. You already are." I want to live in it," she snapped, her voice turning into an angry growl. The sound startled her, and she flinched, her ears flattening against her head. I didn't think it would be like this." Paul was silent for a moment. Then he reached out, placing a hand on her back, a comforting gesture that felt strangely familiar, even though it was meant for a dog. "Change is hard, Emily. This kind of change. It's beyond anything most people could even imagine. But you're strong. You've already come through so much. You can do this." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that she could somehow learn to live in this body, to accept the changes that had been forced upon her. But the truth was, her mind was still stuck in the past, in the body she had lost, the body that had been human. "How long will it take?" she asked quietly, her voice trembling with emotion. "How long until I stop feeling like a stranger in my own skin?" Paul's hand remained steady on her back, his touch warm and reassuring. I don't know, he admitted softly. "Everyone's different, but I promise you, it will get easier. Your body will become more familiar, more natural. You just have to give it time. Time. Time." It was such a simple word, but for Emily, It felt like an eternity stretched out before her. Every day in this new body was a battle, a fight to reclaim some sense of normalcy, some piece of the person she had once been. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, one thing became clear. She wasn't the person she had been. She never would be again. Emily's progress was slow, painfully slow, but it was progress nonetheless. She learned to walk, to run, to run, to balance herself on all fours. Her muscles grew stronger, her movements more fluid. She even learned to control her tail, using it to help steady herself as she moved. But the mental struggle remained. Every step, every movement reminded her of what she had lost. Her body, though functional and capable, still felt like a prison, a cage of fur and claws that she couldn't escape. And yet, with each passing day, she adapted. She learned to navigate the world from this new perspective, to use her heightened senses to her advantage. Her sense of smell, once overwhelming, became a tool, a way to read her environment in ways she had never been able to before. Her hearing, once too sharp, became attuned to the subtle shifts in sound that surrounded her. Her body, though foreign, began to feel less like an enemy. But her mind was still human, and that, perhaps, was the hardest part of all. The day came when Paul decided she was ready for her first walk outside. It had been months since she had stepped foot, outside the confines of the hospital. The thought of being out in the world, exposed in this body, filled her with a mixture of excitement and dread. "Are you ready?" Paul asked, standing by the door, holding a leash in his hand. Emily stared at the leash, her stomach twisting with discomfort. It was a necessity. Of course, she couldn't just walk around freely, not like this. But the sight of it made her feel less than human, less than herself. She nodded, though the movement still felt awkward. "I'm ready," she said, though she wasn't sure if she believed it. Paul clipped the leash to the collar around her neck, a soft, padded collar that she had grown used to wearing. She tried not to think about what it meant, about the fact that she was being led around like an animal. Instead, she focused on the door in front of her, on the world that lay beyond it. The door opened, and a cool breeze swept into the room, carrying with it the sense of the outside world. Emily's nose twitched involuntarily, her heightened sense of smell picking up on 1,000 different things at once. The grass, the faint scent of rain, the distant aroma of food cooking somewhere nearby. Paul gave the leash a gentle tug, and Emily took her first step outside. The world looked different from this angle, but it was still the world, and she was still in it. For now, that would have to be enough.